And I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Yasmin Ziesler, the Vermont State College's Chief Academic Officer, to kick off our retreat.
Great. Actually, I'm going to toss it right over to President Bertolino to welcome us here to Linden, first of all. Thank you, President.
Thanks. Good morning. You can do better than that. Good morning. There we go. Thank you for finding your way to Linden. Welcome, and also congratulations to those of you who do not live in the Northeast Kingdom for finding your way up to the Northeast Kingdom. We appreciate it. We want to thank you for joining us today, and we're delighted to be hosting this year's VSC Academic Retreat. LSC prides itself on being a small, caring, welcoming community focused on relationships, and with that in mind, we invite you to make yourself at home throughout the course of the day. A word of caution, if you go outside, please watch where you are walking as we are dredging the pond. The truth is given our current financial position, we're actually digging for gold. And there was a faculty member that came up to me earlier today and said, actually, Joe, it's green and gold, which are our colors. Cute, okay. All of the joking aside, though, before I turn the mic over to Yasmin, I need to articulate how important this meeting and others like it are to the VSC. We have all seen a decline in enrollment these past few years within the VSC. LSC is not an exception. As an institution whose student body is comprised of nearly 50% out-of-state students, the competition from surrounding states is certainly taking its toll. We're not alone in facing these challenges, not alone in the VSC system, in the state of Vermont, in the Northeast, or in the nation. Save for the West and sections of the South, we see declining numbers of traditional age students nationally. Far more colleges than not are facing enrollment challenges. It's important to understand that this is a common experience. Universities all over the country are trying to do what we in the VSC are trying to do: innovate program delivery, find new efficiencies, expand revenue streams, and cut costs. With everyone moving to the top of his or her game at LSC and the VSC, we must do even better. I cannot impress upon you enough today how important our cross-institutional strategic alliances, collaborations, and yes, even consolidations will be to the future of our respective institutions. Today is an important day to discuss those issues, both with a sense of urgency and with a sense of pride in our institutions. The value proposition of the VSC is strong, and the opportunities are many. So with that, something for you to ponder throughout the course of the day, I turn the mic over to Yasmin, and I thank you for being here and invite you to have a great day. Thanks.
All right, thank you, President Bertolino. I want to just give a big thank you to folks who've helped make this day possible here at Linden: Darcy Miles, Charlotte Purcelli, Aaron Young up in the booth, and particularly Elaine Sopchak from the Chancellor's Office, who really masterminds every detail, including the brilliant idea for the Wordle earlier today. So let's just give these folks a big thank you. Also joining us, the Chancellor, our college presidents, academic deans, and a big welcome and thank you to board members. We have Martha O'Connor, Jerry Diamond, and Jim Maslin joining us here today. Thank you very much. I just want to share the story of how this particular retreat came to be. And before I do that, can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have been to a VSC academic retreat in the past? Wow, okay, great. How many of you have been to more than 3 retreats? Okay. How many of you are new for the first time? Awesome, wonderful, okay. So this retreat is a little different. Well, you know, for those of you who've been here before, you know that every year it's planned by faculty and academic staff from all 5 colleges. We usually pick a topic of shared interest, usually a teaching learning focus, working with students. And we've covered topics like preparing our students for the world beyond our borders, responding to changes in K-12 education, responding to technological evolution in higher education. But this year, the planning committee was noticing the conversations happening at all our campuses about collaboration, about strategic alliances. And the committee came together and said, you know, this year there are a lot of questions. We want to focus this year's retreat on us and on exploring these questions and creating time and space to come together, potentially in some new ways, generate some new ideas. So that is the idea of this year's retreat. And there are many problems we hope to solve through collaboration, right? How do we reach more potential students? Right now, there are about 2,000 Vermont high school seniors who are about to graduate, and we know they do aspire to a college education, but we also know they're not likely to enroll. How might we collaborate as a system to reach out to them? There are about 60,000 Vermonters who have some amount of education. They're in our workforce. They haven't earned a credential. How might we collaborate to reach them? And then how can we collaborate to be cost effective so that every last dollar goes to opportunities for our students? How might we collaborate to create more opportunities for our students? So there's a lot of inspiring work already underway across the system, we know, and you're going to be able to hear from those folks today in just a moment, as well as hear some ideas from beyond our borders of what other institutions, as President Bertolino said, everybody is working on this, and so our keynote speaker today will be sharing some of that with us. So that's the story of our retreat and plan for the retreat. All of you who are planners of the retreat, presenters of the retreat, would you just take a moment to stand and let us thank you as well, because this day is really about all the work that went into it. Everybody stand up. Lots of people involved. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Michael Thomas. He's president and CEO of the New England Board of Higher Education, which is really an organization founded in collaboration or alliance. Following remarks from Dr. Thomas, Chancellor Jeb Spalding will be coming up on stage with all of our panelists who are going to give us just a whirlwind tour of collaboration across the VSC. So first, please join me in welcoming Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice response, thank you. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer to you if that's okay. If I'm squinting, it's just not that I don't want to see you, it's the lights in my face here. But nonetheless, I'd like to be a little bit close to you. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be back at Linden State. Certainly have valued the opportunities to be here in the past. Nebby has worked, as you know, with Linden State and all of the Vermont State College institutions over a number of years, particularly through its regional student tuition break program, but also in a number of different areas as well. I suspect you know a little bit about Nebby. If you don't mind my saying just a few quick words and a little bit of an advertisement here, Nebby was created back in the 50s, a product of the New England governors. If you can think back to the post-World War and Korean War GI enrollment boom, governors were really struggling to figure out how to accommodate all of the students in New England, particularly in the public systems of higher education. And the governors came up with the notion of some sort of an entity that could help bridge and or knit together the New England institutions to work together to save resources and also to be, if you will, a policy resource to the New England states as they address specific higher education issues. And that's really the genesis of the New England Board of Higher Education. And in addition to our regional student program today, we have a number of programs and activities and services that we provide to New England institutions. We worked closely with faculty and staff at Community College of Vermont, who are a great part of a project that we just wrapped up called the Developmental Math Demonstration Project. It was around using free Khan Academy tools in developmental math to see if we could help in the developmental math redesign, if you will. We've been working on the redesign of student aid systems in a number of states in the last few months. We have been spending a lot of time thinking about really the core issues that have been driving some of the conversations that you're having, which is cost and sustainability in higher education, and how can organizations, higher education institutions, work together to think about the future and the sustainability in financial terms, but also to the benefit of students and their ability to get as much value as possible for the money that they pay to their institutions. And a number of different issues that I could spend a lot of time talking about. But fundamentally, what I'd like to share today is an invitation for you to work with and collaborate and continue to work with NEBI on these issues. When we talk about strategic alliance and our collaboration, NEBI is always looking for opportunities to work with institutions and with states to do things in a collaborative, cross-border, and fundamentally at-scale fashion, which is to say, if we can combine resources and institutions and people and know-how across states, we believe we'll be the better for it. So as you have your conversations today, if there are ways that NEBI can help you connect to other institutions or help be part of the structure and the infrastructure by which you can better work together as departments or institutions, please let us know. I want to say thanks again to certainly to Yasmin, to Chancellor Jeb Spalding, Joe Bertolino, Joyce Judy I know is here. Joyce, Joe, and Jeb serve on the NEBI board, and we're appreciative of their service. Thanks again, of course, to the staff from the system and certainly from Linden State for the opportunity to be here. So just to jump in a little bit, we spent a fair amount of time at NEBI, as I mentioned, sort of thinking about these challenging issues facing New England institutions. President Bertolino, I think, hit them right on the nose in a very concise and useful summary about the challenges that higher education, certainly in New England, but it extends beyond in a national sense as well, the challenges institutions are facing. Now, if we sort of channel our inner New Englander, we will, I think, choose to see these challenges fundamentally as opportunities, but that doesn't mean that they're easy, and it doesn't mean we don't have some work ahead of us. But I think that it does present an opportunity for innovative people like yourselves and people with the expertise and experience to come together and work to find new and innovative possibilities and opportunities. Flowing out of the work that we did and our conversations with scores of institutions across the region, we really did think hard about this issue, about how we could have institutions work better together and how we could help overcome some of the isolation and insulation and separateness that we oftentimes face as institutions. Not wholly, but oftentimes, as we are focused on creating the best institution that we possibly can in the places in which we live and work and educate our students. That sprung into some work which I did thinking about the issue of strategic alliances and looking a little bit at the literature. Obviously, strategic alliances aren't new to the world or higher education, but looking at the literature about strategic alliances. And my fundamental goal was to sort of, for my own benefit and then hopefully to share it with others, was to come up with a bit of a vocabulary by which we could talk about this notion of alliance and collaboration. And as you know, higher education is no stranger to collaboration and alliance. Let's see if I can make this work here. There's a lot of alliance and collaborative work that goes on. One of the things I sought to do is create a little bit of a landscape for thinking about this. And this is sort of the schema that I came up with to think about it. No question, some of your institutions and many around New England are part of consortia, and there are hundreds of academic consortia across the United States, and certainly many prominent ones here in New England, and we don't need to name them all, but institutions have come together to share resources, to share faculty, to share staff, to share all sorts of academic and administrative infrastructure and resources. No question, if you were to pick up something out of the popular press related to higher education these days, you would see the forecast of the number of institutional either closures and mergers. You don't have to look too far. The popular press, either the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, perhaps in other press sources that you look at, the issue of mergers and institutions coming together is a very prominent one as well. Really, where we focused our thought and conversation was an area somewhere between consortium and institutional mergers. And you can see the benefits of both of those options and opportunities. Consortia are great because institutions remain fairly independent. They can share in a very organic and productive fashion. They can do it in ways that they identify as being best for themselves as well as the institutions that participate as a whole. Mergers obviously are fairly final, fairly permanent. They're not typically the product of two strong institutions coming together. That can be the case, but oftentimes there are challenges at one or more institution. Mergers are not cheap because to make something out of those circumstances takes extra resources and extra investment. It's not easy to bring together sometimes very disparate cultures and entities and functions. Oftentimes there are winners and losers in mergers, and those issues have to be sorted out. So the focus of my thinking was particularly around this issue of alliance. How could we get perhaps the benefits of both elements on both sides, the merger and acquisition, as well as the consortium, find what I sort of call, as you can see here, the sweet spot, where we could really benefit in ways that would avoid some of the limitations and challenges and costs of certainly merger and acquisition, but perhaps go beyond what your normal consortia in higher education have been able to achieve. And in doing that, came up with a list of, if you will, design principles. So this notion of what would make really an effective and a productive strategic alliance or system strategic alliance. President Bertolino talked about this notion of enrollment softening. It's a phenomenon certainly here in New England, but it extends well beyond. So the notion of an alliance is somewhat growth-oriented. The idea is that if we can grow and generate more resources and do it by cooperation, then we'll be better off. Obviously, it involves multiple institutions. The issue of geography. Obviously, consortia oftentimes are founded in geography, not wholly, but oftentimes they're the convenient partners in your general geographic area. Oftentimes mergers tend to be institutions that are close to one another so they can actually make that physical connection. But how could we not be bound by geography and get beyond it? All the while remembering the importance of place for students, because it's a place where they connect with you and with other people to make meaning and understanding and learning and to succeed. How could we achieve notable cost savings? So again, both academic and administrative. How could we create substantial new expertise and capacity in critical staff, talent, and functional areas? The notion there is, instead of having one slightly challenged department in each of the partner institutions that maybe struggles to get the very best person, could we come together, pool resources, and actually increase the level of a talent we're able to attract? And I provide in the report that I created sort of an example of this, where a group of institutions originating in Chicago but extending to the south and to the west coast as well was able to do this. They were able to bring together a number of services and offices, and consequently they were able to invest much higher in terms of technology as well as staff. They were essentially able to attract better staff than they might have been able to do. So when we think about building, how could that help us attract greater resources and staff? How can we, again, drive enrollment growth? How can we enable substantial institutional model changes? Oftentimes, particularly with consortia, the institutional model doesn't vary a whole lot. A little bit, but the fundamental bases of the institutional model and its structure and things like that doesn't change very much. But how can we also provide for flexibility, which obviously mergers sometimes are a challenge with, preserve continuity, decision-making authority, governance, institutional identity, and then ultimately how can we position an institution really to compete? You know, the reality is, when I speak as a philosophy major, there's nothing more beautiful than the contemplative engagement of an academic institution. But we also all understand that we do face some real realities in the world in terms of resources and challenges and competition, and so we have to be attuned to those facts. And how can we position ourselves to best sort of compete and be able to position our institutions and our system and our collaboration, our alliance, if you will, in the best fashion possible? So that's sort of the overview. Let me give you just a little bit of vocabulary again. In that, research came up with this notion of sort of two elements, complementary alliance and a supplementary alliance. So a complementary alliance, as you note here, it helps us share different assets. So let's say, for example, we're talking about an undergraduate business program. Let's say Linden has a great program that's really solid in terms of just a general straightforward business degree, Let's say Johnson's got some really great e-commerce things and some B2B, business-to-business strengths. And let's say that Castleton maybe has a strength in accounting. So the question is, how could we create out of those assets in a complementary fashion something that didn't exist on any one campus? A unique degree perhaps with some interesting concentrations or helping students maybe get a little bit more out of the degree than they otherwise would. Now, we can talk about lowering cost, and that's important, and I would challenge you to think about that, but I also think we also need to think about how we create value. That's sort of the other flip side of the argument. We could lower cost to students, but if it doesn't really meet their needs or the program isn't strong and valuable, if it doesn't have currency in the workplace once they get out, then that's not great. Or if we can think about how we increase value to students so that I can, as a student, get that extra concentration or come away with some coding expertise that I wouldn't have otherwise had if I was in any one campus, then that's a great opportunity too. And complementary alliances really support economies of scope, which is to say we can do more with either fewer or the same amount of resources. So complementary alliances and economies of scope. And you know, as is may be true for some of you, this is sort of new language for me. As I said, I was a philosophy major, right? So the language of economics isn't necessarily the one I typically use in describing higher education, but this gives us a little bit of a framework and a way to have a conversation. Supplementary alliances is where we share or combine similar assets. So let's go back to the same example. Let's just say we've got 3 very solid general business degrees across 3 institutions. Well, then we could achieve an economy of scale, which is to say we could maybe combine or reduce or consolidate some of those assets so that we're not operating them in 3 different locations. Everyone still benefits. We still have that core that's available to everyone across the system, but we do it on a reduced cost basis and without the redundancy of resources and effort. And the last term I'll give you is a shared utility. I know it's a really sexy term, isn't it? A shared utility. The essence of that, again, it's a little steeped in sort of economics, but the essence of that, let's just call it a shared resource. The reality is, what could we create? Let me go back to the example of that business degree. What if all of our courseware, what if a good share of our lectures from the best faculty across our campuses, what if they could be united to create essentially a flipped classroom that could be shared across all 4 or 5 campuses for undergraduate business courses? Could we create a shared platform, a shared resource that can be supported by all institutions but be available to everyone and provide some level of sort of standardization and, if you will, sort of a tide that raises all boats, so to speak? And there are lots of great examples of shared resources in higher education if you look at the back-end processes. So if we have one accounting office or if we have one IT platform for the delivery of all online learning. And you can think about that. So my challenge here is, as you think about this language, where are opportunities in your institutions for complementary alliance and collaboration, and the realization of economies of scope, particularly in academic and academic-related areas, and where are opportunities for supplementary alliances, where perhaps things already exist and you could find a way perhaps to share those resources by consolidating and creating, if you will, a shared resource or a shared utility across your institutions. All right, anybody awake out there? Okay. All right, just have to check after that vocabulary lesson. So let me just make a couple of points here that I think are really important. I am all for collaboration, I am all for alliance, and I think that's really critical. What I would challenge you to do, however, is not necessarily make that your starting point. What do I mean by that? Well, the reality is, at the end of the day, the key measure of our success is not cost reduction. The key measure of our success is not elimination of redundancy. Now, those things are important, but they're really means rather than ends, right? What are our ends? You can speak up. What are our ends? What are our most important ends? Say? Student success, exactly right. So really the challenge is, how do we come about this from a learner-centered perspective? Now, let's be honest. I'm fundamentally a very selfish human being. It's very convenient for me to view the world from where I stand and what benefits me and what is most convenient for me. And my wife and my children will attest to that reality. So, bringing this into a more professional and higher education sphere, how do we really adopt, as you have said, and importantly noted, a learner-centered perspective? And this is something we tried to spend some time thinking about at the New England Board of Higher Education, or NEBI as we're called. We had a conference on it recently to sort of catalyze this question, but what would a learner-centered institution really look like? And it does require you and I to sort of step back, and for me to get out of, my selfish little spot there, and really to get in the shoes of those students that we work with, and understand what would a learner-centered institution look like. And then, collaboration, and I would probably challenge you to use the phrase and the topic of innovation fundamentally, even more than collaboration. I mean, collaboration to some extent is likely to be sort of evidence of a number of types of innovation that one could engage in. But fundamentally, I think we really need to start with that question of what would a learner-centered institution look like, and how can our collaborations, our complementary alliances and supplementary alliances, our shared resources, how can they further the notion of a learner-centered institution, and as you've said, fundamentally, student success? And the answer is, if it's just us asking that question, the challenge will be getting all of the right information, because it will still be hard for us to sort of step out of our slightly interested, faculty-specific, department-specific, institution-specific role view and vantage and perspective. And so it creates this question of then, what are the circumstances under which we can create this innovation and or collaboration? And the literature on that is pretty clear, right? You've got to have a little bit of time. You've got to have some resources. You certainly have to have some leadership, and I think you've got some great leadership here institutionally at the system level, and clearly, as I think you'll see later in these conversations, some great leadership actually on the ground with faculty who are working well together to create these innovative and collaborative possibilities. So to channel, if you will, the Vermont Von Trapps, nothing comes from nothing, right? Nothing ever could. So there's got to be something to work with. We've got to have some resources to prime the pump. You've got to have a little bit of free time. You've got to have some resources. And sometimes we have to suspend the rules a little bit too. Now, the reality is, if you get to where we are in higher education, it's not because you haven't been able to demonstrate success, right? You're sitting where you are because fundamentally you're success and success demonstrating people. Now, innovation, however, is not sort of premised on the same notion. Innovation is largely failure, right? Which is a little bit hard to do in an academic environment because we don't like to do failure publicly for a variety of reasons, and we don't typically suggest to our students that they should do failure publicly. But innovation does require a little bit of opportunity to fail, and to fail quickly, and you know sort of the verbiage around this. We certainly live in a sort of a fast-speed innovation culture these days, but the notion is we've got to have opportunities to experiment, and we've got to have opportunities to be able to say, okay, the blocks fell down, let's try a new opportunity and a new possibility. So I think one of the challenges for you and for your leadership is to say, how do we really create an innovation-oriented culture around here? How do we create the spaces and the places and the resources where that can happen? How do we incentivize faculty? Because we're obviously still going to make sure that you're want to know that you're doing your teaching and doing it well and meeting your load and you're doing your research and all of those other things that when it comes time for promotion and tenure and advancement are still there. But how do we incentivize the work that you're doing to engage in these important things? All right, Yasmin, I think I've got 10 minutes. Is that right? Is that all right, or are you less? Okay, all right. So with that, let's see here. You can, for what it's worth, you can look at the key alliance takeaways, but the reality is I think we've hit most of these. Engage with the higher education innovation ecosystem. You would be amazed at the innovation that is occurring outside of the walls of our institutions. So there are people all across this country, a lot of them in Boston, a lot of them in Silicon Valley, a lot of them in Austin, Texas, a lot of them elsewhere, who are trying to break higher education. And primarily, they're trying to do something that we do and trying to do a little bit better, and a lot of it involves technology. And so one of the things I think we need to think about is we got to look outside of the institution for some solutions and some partners. There are people out there doing really interesting things, and they're looking for partners and institutions with which to work. So I think we really need to fully engage the higher education innovation ecosystem based on whatever challenges we've identified we're trying to address. Is it student advisement? Is it the more efficient delivery of content and information? Is it assessment? There's a lot of stuff going on out there. So if you don't find what you think you might need within here, look in the larger higher education innovation ecosystem, because there are people out there trying to do this work and trying to help higher education do this work as best we can. The reality is, when you look at forms of innovation, the literature talks about a number of different forms. Now, programs and offerings, I think you've talked about that. It was mentioned in the opening comments. There's no question that you need to innovate around programs and offerings. But to the point that was already made, the reality is a lot of other institutions are trying to innovate around programs and offerings as well. That's not to say you can't innovate, and it's not to say you can't be successful, but the reality is there's a lot of that going on out there. One of the real key forms of program and offering leadership is this notion of disruptive innovation, which, if you boil it down, is the essence of who's not consuming, that is, who's not getting education, and I think the opening comments indicated that. You've got 60,000 Vermonters here who've got some college but no degree, and you've got a bunch of high school graduates who are not coming your direction. So those are your non-consumers. How do you reach them? Now, some of them are going to be hard to reach, and some of them are going to be hard to serve. They're not ready. They've got challenges, but some of those you can and should figure out who those people are, where are they, and how do you get to them, and how can you serve them. Other forms of engagement really come around engagement and experience. And when we were thinking about what constitutes a learner-centered institution, it's one that, from the standpoint of service and responsiveness engagement, is one that really looks to the student's needs. So rather than the student having to come to you and walk across campus and find a parking space to come and solve this problem, how could you be like, for example, an institution in North Carolina that I had visited, where in every building on campus, a student can walk to a concierge desk. How many of you like to use a concierge at a hotel? Absolutely. Why shouldn't a student have a concierge? Why couldn't a student walk to the desk and say, listen, I've got a bill I've got to pay, can you help me with that? Or, I've got a fine that's overdue, can I return these books here? How can we change, if you will, the way that we engage with students and the student experience? And I know you think about that a lot, because you're the ones who are close to students. And my challenge to you would be, how do you use and how do you co-create the consumers of higher education, our students? Because again, if it's up to you and I to think of the solutions, we're going to, again, we're going to speak to our orientation and our preferences and our biases and our belief about authority and function and structure. But if we talk with students, I would challenge everyone here, make a half hour's time, 45 minutes time in one of your core sessions in the upcoming semester to sit down with students and say, hey, I want you to take a blank sheet of paper and I want you to spend the next 15 minutes in collaboration, or 20 minutes or half hour in collaboration with your colleagues, and I'd like for you to draw me a picture of a learner-centered institution. What would it look like from your standpoint? Or if you could create the institution of the future, what would it look like? Because I think you'd probably learn some interesting things, and what was important to them, and what reflected the needs and the challenges and the issues that they're facing, and the realities of the ways they interact with you and with your institution. And then, lastly, we've talked about this, institutional configuration and operational excellence. And that's really strategic alliance, again, primarily for economies of scale, right? That's how do we integrate backends, reduce costs, how do we sort of create these shared utilities or platforms where we, again, get as much of the cost and the inconvenience and the redundancy out of it as we can. So I would really challenge you to think about these opportunities for innovation, because fundamentally collaboration is more really evidence of innovation than collaboration for the sake of collaboration. Let me close. I had a few questions for you to think about. So the question is, so what does this mean for me? What does this mean for you in your role as a faculty member in teaching Vermont's very able students? You hit it on the nose when you talked about success. At the end of the day, this is fundamentally about learners. It's fundamentally about their success. Again, I would challenge you to talk with your students, co-create with them. Again, figure out who's not here, who are the non-consumers, and how can we reach them. I would challenge you to think about how you could create one Vermont State College, which is to say, how could you create a seamless experience across all of the Vermont State institutions to where you could get, again, some of those benefits of economies of scope as well as scale, but so the students could access a greater set of opportunities and possibilities. And again, looking at it primarily from where they are. And again, challenging you to think about how you could eliminate the geography variable. Now again, at the end of the day, place is going to be critical to students, but there are some ways in which you could work to eliminate the geography variable to a greater extent. And I'll leave one final thought with you, because there's no question that, well, New England, we're distinctive in a number of ways, but one of the ways we're distinctive is that we have, on average, higher cost students. Now, on a net basis, it's still less than we get criticized for being, but fundamentally, we face challenges around making it affordable. There's a notion of Gandhian innovation. And you've seen examples of institutions out there, or governors challenging you to create a $10,000 undergraduate degree. And I don't know what the right answer is for a Vermont student, and I don't know what the right answer is for the various types of Vermont students out there. But if you had to do a Gandhian innovation project, and I challenge you to think about it, how would you drive out the cost to make an undergraduate degree as cheap as possible for a student? Last thought I'll leave with you is this. The reality is, if we go back to the notion of geography, you and I, the course of my life, I've yet to run into a person who's been to more colleges and universities than I'd have. I'd love to meet a person, and I'm sure they're out there. But over the course of my experience, I've just had a great opportunity to visit a lot of colleges and universities, certainly here in New England, but nationally and even occasionally internationally. I've always loved colleges and universities. I like the way they feel. I like that green quad. I like that building. I just like how they feel. And you are probably the same way. It probably speaks to some reason why you're here today. You sort of like the feel of a college campus too. And I think most of our students feel the same way. I hope that's the case. You'll know that better than I do, because you're face-to-face with them, and you know how they respond to their environment and their opportunities. But certainly one of the challenges, if we answer that question, if they're not here with us, where are they, is how do we get to them? And certainly there's some great work being done today in a Gandhian sense, if you will, of lowering the costs, and in part doing that through employers. And to what extent do we need to work and collaborate and create a structure in which students can learn where they earn, if you will, learn where they work, and work with as many employers. Now, the challenge of a lot of New England states is that, a lot of our employers are fairly small. But nonetheless, the question is, how do we perhaps think about, again, eliminating possibly that geography variable a little bit to be able to help students to a greater extent learn where they earn, given the realities of their life. There's a reason they're not here. And again, although we'll want them to be here and want them to have experiences, are there ways that we could help them to learn where they earn? I'm going to stop. Do we want to do questions, or we want to go to the next part? Yeah, questions or comments? I put you to sleep. Any questions, comments, responses before we move on? Yes, please.
We tend to think of ourselves as being very unique in Vermont. I'm wondering from your perspective whether our design of education here in Vermont is truly unique.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I wish I could posit myself as an expert to judge that. I guess I would say, well, let's focus on a relative rather than an absolute comparison, which is to say, what really counts is a relative comparison, and that's the student, right? It's the student's perspective, because at the end of the day, we can certainly look at absolute comparisons. I would say in absolute comparisons, the reality of most small to mid-sized state universities in New England, the Northeast and beyond, is that it's hard to be distinctive. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I would focus primarily, again, on the question of being a learner-centered institution and who you're trying to serve. And if you're meeting their needs, that ought to be your reference point, and figure out, are we unique and or, applicable and supportive of their needs? Does that work?
So, Michael,
please.
we do it to you, but we got a fast-paced morning, so
Okay, no, that's great. We're going to move on. All right. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. The last thing I'll say is keep NEBI informed. As you're doing some good things, and there are great examples on the panel this morning, let NEBI know. New England Journal of Higher Education is a great place where you can talk about the good work that you're doing. We can share it across New England. We can catalyze a conversation for further collaboration and really showcasing the good work that you're doing. So let's be in touch.
Thank you, Michael. Now let me ask you a question before you go down.
Okay.
That Wednesday morning NEBI blast, can people go to the NEBI site and sign up for that?
Yes, you can.
So every Wednesday morning they send out like a blast of stuff that's happening across New England and across the country. And it's everything from transitions to new ideas, and it's definitely worth doing. So it's nebi.org, and
nebi.org,
look it up. And I think this was a great session that's going to set up the next panelist session. So when I finish thanking Michael, if I could get the rest of the panel to make their way up here, both panels, and make yourselves comfortable together, we'll go to the next session. So listen, Michael, I don't think they were sleeping at all. I think that was very kind of thought-provoking, and it was just what we needed. For your information, everybody, the Long-Range Planning Committee of the Board of Trustees, which is chaired by Jerry Diamond, read Michael's article there and thought, okay, in addition to our efforts to try to become a even more comprehensive and integrated system with multiple distinctive institutions within it, for the benefit of our students, that we also ought to look at this concept of strategic alliances. And we've asked presidents of Linden and Johnson, presidents of, I saw the presidents of CCV and Vermont Tech here to actually push the envelope here, come back with some thoughts. And I know that's going on right now. And the reason we do it, in my view, is to preserve and strengthen our academic mission as colleges and a university within the state college system, and to actually preserve and expand and extend and strengthen our support services for students in a very challenging environment. Now, everybody knows that I've had somewhat of a political background, and I'd love to speak for a while, and you asked me to arrange this, so I couldn't do it. So we've got all these people are going to have to make their presentations in 1 hour before we go to the breakout session. So I don't have a chance to make a speech, but I do want to tell you one thing. And maybe, Michael, it's my New England DNA, but I see these daunting times as an opportunity. And I see that as an opportunity to explain to the public and legislators and so forth the importance of the Vermont State College system. And what is really gaining us traction is that, like nobody else, we're not unique in the challenges we face of any colleges and universities around this region or country. I was surprised to be learning from Georgia that there are parts of Georgia that are seeing declining populations, and they're thinking of the same kind of things we're thinking about. So we're not unique. But in the state of Vermont, here's how we are unique. We are the extension of the public school system into the post-secondary years. Like our public schools, we've got valedictorians, we've got high performers, and like our public schools, we have a lot of students that have struggled in life, have struggled in school, and if it wasn't for us, they would not be going on to college. And that is our unique proposition in the state of Vermont, like nobody else. And we have an obligation to provide a high-quality education. We are the linchpin for upward mobility to address the inequality gap. And that's starting to catch on, which is why the Vermont State Colleges actually got a 2.75% increase in our appropriations. The first time we've gone above the 2008 level, and we hadn't had an increase in years. I think the legislature, and we were the only higher ed group that actually got an increase in our appropriation. It ain't a game changer. It's the beginning of a recognition of the importance we are in the state of Vermont. The only thing I would say is, I can tell you with legislators, they're saying, hey, yeah, you've got to do your part too. And when they look around and say, okay, we want to make sure that our limited dollars are spent on preserving and strengthening the academic mission and support services for students. That's what it's about. And they want to see us do it, and that's what this is about.